And honestly, John, like when I've had two mothers now. Well, one mother with the morgue situation where her daughter was told there's no such thing as copper toxicity, was on a copper IUD, killed herself, and then the mother went to the morgue to collect the hair sample, and the hair sample showed sky high copper. Now, if the denial of copper toxicity didn't exist and people were educated in this information, we could literally be saving lives.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Minded Podcast. Are you interested in learning more about vitamins, minerals, heavy metal detoxification, and natural health? We explore a range of topics that are related to mineral balancing science and hair tissue mineral analysis, including in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about the wonderful world of natural medicine. I'm your host, John Bumpus. Today on the Mineral Minded Podcast, we had an excellent conversation with Rick Fisher. Rick is a leading expert in hair tissue mineral analysis, copper toxicity, and mineral education. As founder of coppertoxic.com, together with supporting international research and his various educational materials on the topic, Rick's work over the past decade has advanced public and practitioner awareness of copper toxicity. He works as a clinical HTMA practitioner as well as an instructor. He is a passionate advocate for maintaining the integrity and authenticity of HTMA and is the co-founder of the HTMA Virtual Summit, which strives to provide excellence and leadership in HTMA-based health education. Rick is also the founder and teacher of the Mineral Mastery Program, a course designed to bring vital mineral-based health education to both practitioners as well as the general public. You can connect with Rick at mineralsandhealth.com or visit his teachings at mineralmastery.com and coppertoxic.com. Hey Rick, welcome to the Mineral Minded Podcast. Nice to have you here.
Happy to be here, John.
So I have seen you throughout the internet with all of your work on copper toxicity and hair tissue mineral analysis. Before we get into any real conversations, because I know that you're really keen to talk about copper, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how you actually got into hair tissue mineral analysis, because everyone has a bit of a different story and how it came to them.
Yeah, certainly. I began this work back in 2013 after a tragic incident that happened to my fiance at that time with copper toxicity stemming in large part from her copper IUD and some other factors as well. And because of the denial of hair analysis at that time by her doctor, she was led on a dangerous path, and it destroyed our relationship, our family. And I just my life for several years just into the research of copper toxicity, which can only fully be understood when you look at copper in connection with other minerals. And in order to do that, you also need to utilize hair analysis, because a blood test, and we can talk more about this if you want, but a blood test alone is not enough to fully grasp copper toxicity. And this is why hair analysis is so important. And unfortunately, it's a test that has been attacked over and over again over the decades, which has kept it off the radar of a lot of people with tragic consequences.
Wow. Yeah. So you come completely in that copper toxicity basis. Most people usually talk about their own health, but for you, it was someone that you're in a relationship with, and you've seen the devastating effects that can have.
This was an act of love that got me into this field. I mean, I have a nutrition background to begin with and a health background, but I was never taught any of these deep mineral concepts or hair analysis in my training. And just as I began my research and witnessing more and more the denial of copper toxicity, first of all, and the non-acceptance of HTMA or the misuse of HTMA, and the vast numbers of people, and women especially, who were affected by copper toxicity, that just drove me further to really get this information out there.
Oh, that's fantastic because, you know, as you said, the blood test is limited. And I think we should be clear, because both of us primarily practice with hair tissue mineral analysis, that hair testing is limited as well. But it's just understanding those limitations. And then if you can't see what you're looking for, maybe you should consider another test. And I think that's one reason why a lot of medical doctors have this veil of ignorance over them, is because they kind of live in this, you know, blood reigns. It's the ultimate test. And then they might do urine or something if they're looking for a kidney infection or something. But they overlook the simplicity of a hair test. And to be fair, I think it's because, and maybe it's a lot like when you went to nutrition school. I know it was when I went, I didn't really learn much about minerals. Basically, it was like, oh, they're important, they're essential for health, and then it goes calcium for bones, magnesium for bones, and ATP, and then you just kind of brush over it, and then it's like, oh,
eat your kale and eat healthy, and the fluffy stuff.
Here's some food sources for all of it, and now they have put a vegan twist on it all anyway. But it's basically eat a balanced diet, which is the same thing the medical doctor says. And when it comes into practice, it doesn't always pan out that way. So I think hair tissue mineral analysis is a critical tool, but we need to understand that because it's been vilified throughout history, and even to some degree, maybe there was a kind of effort to destroy this whole perspective of hair testing, that we definitely need to be mindful about when, you know, you and I incorporate it into our practices, to be a little bit more open about, you know, the limitations, but also like its validity, and, you know, keep hammering home that like, this isn't like a bioenergetic test that one person might test you and another person might test you for the same thing, and they come back complete opposites. You know, maybe you've had that experience with kinesiology where someone says, you know, you need copper, you need selenium. And then when you do an actual hair test, it's like, no, you really don't. Right. And it's like that hair scan that we see on the internet. And some people come to me and they go, hey, I got a hair test, and they send me this report that was done through a machine. Do you have any experience with that?
Oh, John, I have experience with pretty much all the different types of hair analysis out there, and there are a lot of them. And this adds to the confusion because, you know, people think that a hair analysis is all the same, and it is anything but. There are not only many labs and forms of hair analysis, and not all are focused on, you know, what we're talking about here in terms of nutritional hair analysis. But yeah, as you mentioned, there's a biogenic element to it, where you place, you know, a hair follicle on a disc, and it gets beamed across the ocean and magically sends back, you know, a beautiful report with results. I've received hair analyses from overseas, where someone got their test done by the local lab, and magnesium wasn't even included. Now, I mean, you and I both know that magnesium is one of the most important minerals. So how can you even do a mineral test and not even test for magnesium? It's shocking. And then I've seen others where, or a lot where the practitioner or the lab is simply advising based on the face value readings. Okay, so if we use magnesium again as an example, a magnesium bar can be high in the hair analysis. Same thing with zinc or possibly potassium or other levels as well. And without proper training, they will just say, well, your level of that mineral is high and therefore you should avoid it. In some cases, they'll say it's toxic, you know, avoid it at all costs. And they're not understanding that a lot of these situations where a hair level is elevated is being caused by intracellular loss. So this concept needs to be understood by any practitioner offering hair analysis. And I find that many practitioners are not trained in that very simple concept. there's also the ignorance to exogenous exposures. What I mean by that is if a person has had an Epsom salt bath, for example, and their hair contacted the Epsom salt bath water and their hair magnesium is high. Again, that should be a question that any practitioner asks of their patient if they see a high level. Is this a possible exposure source? What about well water? If certain levels show high, maybe manganese or iron show high, don't just assume that it's a high level in the body. Ask other exposures could this person have had to have created this high level.
Can I just say something on that, though?
Jump in.
So one thing with the contamination thing, and I think this is something we need to consider as well, is it's not enough just to say, oh, because it might be on the hair that have a burden of it or even a toxicity of it. But it's also something to consider that, especially in the case of iron and manganese in well water, that if you've been exposed to that for years and you've been washing your body, literally bathing in it, to some degree, it's where a contamination becomes an exposure because you've been, consuming. It's like copper. If it's Absolutely. In the well water and you have acidic water, or even, it doesn't even always have to be very acidic water, it can still pick that up. And yes, it can be a contamination, but you're also being exposed to that. It's like if you're a welder and you get, or a plumber or something, you get exposed to lead and it's on the hair and they didn't wash it. Okay, that's contaminant, but there's, it's still a source as well. What could
Absolutely. There is that transdermal absorption that does happen. So if you are bathing or showering in water that comes from your well, or you're in a swimming pool every day that's using copper sulfate, your hair can show a very high level, but yes, there is that transdermal absorption that also happens.
Yeah. I just think it's important to talk on that now. So that would be a high level that comes from basically a contamination, though. And you touched on this loss that you think everybody should be, well, I think as well, everyone should be aware of what this loss is. Maybe you can just share that, because, people that listen to this podcast are likely, they might be practitioners, but they might not be, and they might be working with someone that's, reading every level as face value. So do you want to just share about that a little bit?
Certainly. So let me give you, I'll use a very easy example. People understand calcium and magnesium for the most part, right? These are two minerals that you can go to any store and you'll often see the calcium magnesium bottle. The formulation where those two minerals are kind of combined, because those two nutrients need to be in balance. They have a relationship. So in a hair analysis, quite often we'll see a very high calcium level paired with a very high magnesium level. So what does that mean? Well, the high calcium level is representing tissue calcification. What happens in that process is calcium is leaving the bone where it needs to be, entering the blood and ending up in soft tissue. Well, as a natural response, the body then pulls magnesium out of the cell to put magnesium into blood in effort to keep calcium in solution. If you go back to basic, chemistry class in high school, in solution basically means it's soluble. So instead of having little calcium crystals floating around in the blood, we don't want that. The body protects itself by bringing magnesium into the blood to keep that calcium in solution. So you're losing magnesium from the cell where the magnesium needs to be. It's going into the blood, and then what is circulating gets picked up eventually by the hair follicle. As the hair grows out, then it shows up as that elevated magnesium level. And this is very common. Yeah. So this loss pattern needs to be understood. And also even stress can induce loss patterns, especially with things like magnesium and zinc, for example. We lose those minerals under stress. Mm. So when a practitioner looks at a hair analysis and sees a high level, it's very important to be asking the questions, what is causing the high level? What's behind this level? And don't just automatically assume that it's a high level and the person doesn't need that nutrient.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think with the stress, and if zinc and magnesium and even B vitamins are like the first things to be, utilized to stress. It's not always that like, oh, stress depletes these nutrients. It does, but it's only because the body uses those nutrients in response to the stress.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you do have stress and you find that zinc go up, it's probably because the body's utilizing it, and then it starts to get eliminated through the urine or something. It can come from the sweat or some other place.
Mm-hmm.
And then zinc and magnesium are really interesting because both of those are synergistic with potassium. So you can likely still have a high potassium level or even a sodium level, because sodium and potassium have that balance, right? Mm-hmm. So we see, at least in my practice, we see a lot of people that come in with a calcium shell, but then they'll also have an elevated sodium and potassium. And, I think on TI, they call it like a slow 3 or slow 4 pattern, where they're not like the classical high calcium and magnesium and low sodium and potassium. They're more like a 4 high pattern. We would call it ARL, or like a 3 highs or something. And those to me are really stress induced losses of patterns of minerals, because if you're a slow oxidizer, you shouldn't at least typically have a really high sodium or a really high potassium. We need to ask why. And we know sodium and potassium is correlated with the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is what it responds to that stressors, right? With aldosterone, cortisol, and adrenaline even. So, we always got to be mindful of that. So I get a lot of clients that end up going to like a naturopath here in Australia. And then they'll go, oh, we did a hair test and we've already gone through an interpretation. And they say, oh, my naturopath said my sodium's high, so I need to avoid it. I have too much potassium and all of this, so I got to stop eating, so much fruit or something. Do you find that in your practice as well, Rick, where like people use that at face value and then make like a big claim, like, just to avoid something where you shouldn't?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. What you're talking about there with the, the slow 3 or 4 highs pattern, that's typically a slow oxidizer under stress, because right. You're under the surface, you're still in an exhaustion state, but there's something causing the adrenals to kick in, aldosterone to increase, raising the sodium level. And then with sodium, then potassium tends to rise as well. Mm-hmm. And it's often a loss. I can tell you that the vast majority of people have a deficiency of potassium. To think that anyone's potassium is perfect, in a trace elements test, TEI lab, the ideal is 10 milligrams percent. If we see a 10 milligram percent potassium, in my opinion, it's unrealistic to think that person has a perfect potassium level. It's not realistic. In almost every case, that potassium is reflecting a loss to some degree. Most people, almost everyone, has a deficiency of potassium at the cellular level. So then if potassium is showing high, well, is it a loss? Is there something impairing potassium from getting to where it needs to be? And I see this is another misconception that I see quite often amongst practitioners, where, in one test, you'll have a potassium level at, say, 2 or 3. And then the next test, the potassium goes up to 8 or 9. And on the surface, that looks good. And the client feels happy because they see potassium going up into a good range. And the practitioner says that's an improvement. Well, it can be. But are you asking, is that simply an increased loss happening?
It's possible. I mean, yep. I think that's the value of interpretation and then right. actually evaluating, because right. another one comes is you can have people that live on coffee and cigarettes or, whatever sodium and potassium raisers that increase adrenal response. And they might come back and they might have a diet completely deficient of potassium, but still have a good level of potassium on the hair test. So with me, I'm always suggesting that my clients if you're going to focus on anything with your diet, focus on your potassium intake. And then, because it's not easy to make to reach that, even that RDA or the RDI, depending what country you're in, it was a 4,700 milligrams. And even there's some disagreement among government agencies on what ideal potassium is. But that RDA is only the bare minimum we should be going for. And, right. I think it was the Paleolithic people were known to have 8,000 milligrams of potassium. We can't, I can't get that much, so it's something to consider when you find some with good potassium levels or even high, that maybe it's not exactly the case. Do you think that plays a role with even some of this reason why some people say HTMA is not accurate? Because they would say, hey, my level's good. Right?
Absolutely. All the time, if you're simply reading a hair analysis at face value, you're going to get things wrong. Mm-hmm. And this is why, training and practice is so essential. And even just, I know, John, you're making a course right now, which I commend you for doing. Nothing can replace, at this time, nothing can replace practical experience. Exactly. Getting the training is important. Getting your certificate is step one, but then going into practice and working, not with patients initially, work with your friends and family and practice this, because HTMA, and I see this too, is someone gets their certificate and, next day they're out calling themselves a practitioner.
Starting their business and they're now an expert. And it's
exactly. HTMA is so complex. I don't think anyone can ever fully understand all the nuances of HTMA. It's an ongoing process of learning, but it does take, I say it takes at least 100 hair analyses to analyze just to get comfortable with what you're doing. Anything below that, you're still an apprentice.
I agree, because in our course, that was a concern of mine, was book learning without practical experience. So trying to replicate that in our course became a real challenge. So we ended up doing case studies. So I would comment about various, I think I did 10 or 13 different case studies where I would go through, how I perceived this test, why I recommended things, but it wasn't like the student learning their own experiential way. It was learning from someone else, of what they've done and why they did it, and then what the results came back as. So we can kind of show them over a year, 2 years, what can happen if you do things. And then, and I've honestly even been like, I just knew intuitively they needed this. And it wasn't indicated on the hair test. I was just like, hey, they need this nutrient, and then it seems to pan out. And the other thing is, so we tried to, at least in our course, we tried to replicate a little bit of that mentorship with that. And then we also gave them actual cases themselves. So we give them a hair test and an intake form and ask them to interpret it and, type a thing up. And then we also ask them, hey, do a supplement recommendation, and we did it for 3, but you need more than 3, but it was to get, so when they finish, it's not their first time doing it, was kind of our goal, so that it was at least it's not their first time working with someone and it's their mom, right? At least they would have been approved on something they recommended, in the past. So I think
that's really important. That's one of the things that I do. I mean, I've trained a lot of practitioners, and just even doing ongoing mentorship as practitioners are getting comfortable with HTMA, and they'll submit to me their protocol. I'll review it. I'll give them my suggestions, and having that person to bounce ideas off of is, I think, really important until you've done a number of these and really get comfortable with it. And like you said, there's also that element of kind of intuition. We kind of start to pick up on things that I think only come with experience, intuitive suggestions or intuitive understanding of what might be causing a certain pattern.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I guess because we were talking about losses, we also got to consider stress, like emotional stress, physical stress is a real thing. It's undeniable. But there's also that stress in the body due to chemicals or toxic metals that we might not see on that hair test. And there's lots of times I've been talking with someone, I said, look, you're going to start dumping lead, or you're going to start dumping this, or mercury is another one, because you see the low zinc, you see the low selenium, and you see, low thyroid, and you're like, there's got to be some mercury there. This person ate tuna for the last, 6 years. Where is it? And then the next test, it jumps right up. And then, it makes the client actually really believe you as well, when you can kind of foresee the future with what's going on. But then also it's just that there was no indication on the test to show that, well, the level itself, if you looked at mercury or whatever one, that was the reason why they had a high sodium or something, so.
Yeah, or low potassium, blocking potassium from getting to where it needs to be. Yeah. And again, this goes back to what we talked about earlier about reading a test at face value. You cannot do that. So just because you don't see any toxic metals showing up in the hair does not mean that the body has no toxic metals in the body. It's not demobilized at that time. So if you see a zinc level at 10 or 11 milligrams percent, and yet mercury is not showing, there's a pretty good chance that there is mercury in the system. It's just not mobilized. And sure enough, then on a retest, maybe next retest or 2 tests down the road, you'll see that mercury pop up, or aluminum or arsenic, whatever it might be. Yeah. And a client then will sometimes be discouraged because they see that as a worsening of their condition. And again, this is where the practitioner has to explain, this is not necessarily a worsening of your condition. This is your body now having the ability to mobilize that metal, which is step 1. Step 2 is getting it out of the body. But at least you're mobilizing things now.
Yeah, of course. And it can take, sometimes years to get metals out, and you are always getting exposed as well. So it's kind of like, you're trying to empty a bucket that's being filled at the same time. Right. We want to kind of encourage the elimination quicker than the utilization. And that's where we need to take advantage of nutrients and how they antagonize and protect us from toxic metals, as well as encourage the elimination. So, that's one reason why I don't really like Andy Cutler protocols or something, where it's just like, take a chelator. And then they're like, oh, don't take it. Those B vitamins. It has sulfur in it. It's like, how important sulfur is for detoxing? You can't just avoid sulfur, and say, oh, I'm detoxing because I'm taking a chelator to do it. And there are some cases where too much sulfur is contraindicated as well, because sulfur can raise calcium but that kind of takes some practice as well. Do I use a methyl donor for a slow oxidizer? Do you use them, Rick, like taurine or TMG or anything?
Oh, like absolutely. That? Yeah, absolutely. Especially with something like copper, that taurine, that sulfuric amino acid is so important to help escort copper out of the body. If you think about copper, and we can talk about that next if you want.
Sure. Let's
copper toxicity. The primary route of copper toxicity to get out of the body is through bile. And what supports bile? Well, your sulfuric amino acids, and taurine is one of those. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'm applying taurine pretty much with anyone with a blatant copper toxicity condition, especially if they're not. If you're on a meat-based diet, you're eating lots of meat, then there's a good chance you're getting probably enough taurine. But especially if you're vegetarian or vegan, your taurine dietary intake is minimal at best.
I absolutely no, because it comes from animals primarily. So, taurine, I guess I just wanted to comment quickly just on this idea of addressing a hair test completely based off nutrient interactions can cause problems as well. So if just only because we brought up taurine and like a slow oxidizer, taurine is a methyl group, so like a sulfur, and sulfur can raise calcium. And some people will say, don't take anything that would raise calcium if they have a calcium shell or if they have an elevated calcium. It seems like you're not in that camp, Rick, and I'm not in that camp either. I will use something, even though it might be somewhat contraindicated, but it's because I have a reason for using it, sometimes, even just using actually calcium or magnesium, and sometimes you can't use too much magnesium or something, but you do need it still. And taurine is a good example of that, or even TMG, right?
Yeah.
really important nutrients. And the other thing is those sulfur amino acids, maybe you have some experience with this, Rick, but when you're going through copper dumps, or like, for those that don't know what that, it's basically like when your body starts to eliminate that copper that was built up in the liver or in the nervous system. It can even be in the muscles. Once it starts to come out, usually you don't feel that great, A, and then B, they can have a really strong mental and emotional connection. And using sulfur amino acids like inositol, choline, methionine, taurine, even niacin can be really helpful to kind of curve that copper dump symptoms. Do you use it for that as well, or is it just because you already recommend it that you don't use more? Or what's your thoughts on that, Rick?
Yeah, no, I do use that. I just want to comment quickly on the word elimination, because I find that leads to sometimes a bit of misunderstanding amongst people who are new to this. Sure. So when we think of elimination, we conjure up the image of the body eliminating it, getting it out of the body.
Yeah.
And copper dumping really is not so much the elimination as it is the mobilization. Copper dumping is the mobilization of the copper out of cell and tissue into the bloodstream. And now it's mobilized, things are dumping. And then elimination is the next step, is getting it out of the body.
Right. Yeah? Thanks for that clarification. Because I just kind of, breeze over it a little bit, but no, you're absolutely right. It is like that.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the elimination aspect, yes, taurine and the sulfuric amino acids are definitely, sulfur compounds are definitely important for that. And it is during that dumping phase where copper is being stirred up and floating around in the blood that the reactions typically amplify and people don't feel good. And it's going to lead to the heightened anxiety and the heightened panic reactions, because there's that hypoglycemic reaction and it's increasing adrenaline at that same time. And adrenaline's an anxiety and panic hormone. Copper dumping for, I would say, most people who are truly copper toxic is not a fun experience. So again, then comes the education. People feel worse initially, and if they're not taught that this is part of the process, they might give up. And likewise, just because a person feels better immediately, does that necessarily mean that they're healed? Likely not. Yeah. You can drink boatloads of coffee and get a buzz and feel all revved up and stimulated and high energy, but does that mean your body is functioning optimally and your energy is actually really good? No, it's a stimulant. And copper actually has a similar effect. Copper has a similar effect on the brain as D-amphetamine. So then people are buying their copper supplements and getting, feeling good initially. And they're not being taught about copper's effect on that mechanism, how it's a stimulant initially.
So you have a lot of clients that initially come to you to feel better. And are you one of the, I know I do it. I usually tell them, well, you might feel worse. And then like in the long term, you can feel better. But, once we start improving the body and taking away some crutches, you might not always feel the best ever. And, I say this to even potential client. I'm a terrible salesperson because I'll tell them yes, in the long term on a program, you can feel better, but depending on your situation,
I'm going to put you through hell first.
Right. And you'll feel better only because of how bad you felt before. No, but that is a thing, right? Where some of those dumping, and it's to some degree, you can kind of predict it, but not always. Like you don't know when you're going to start dumping and then eliminating that copper. And some people start dumping before their body's really able to completely eliminate. And that can cause a real challenge as well. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for us to predict that with every individual,
Well, you want to be support. Yeah. I mean, I see the protocols that are pushing the high. So well, let's go back a step. A lot of my clients, the majority of my clients, because my specialty is copper toxicity, and I work with, now thousands of copper toxic females, a lot of them on copper IUDs. That is the bulk of my clientele.
Yeah.
And most of them are really struggling when they come to me with all kinds of health symptoms. The anxiety, depression, the overwhelming fatigue, exhaustion, and then gut issues, I would say, would be the third thing. And then weight gain and other symptoms as well. But they're feeling horrible, and all they want to do is feel better tomorrow. And it's not as simple as that. And, all the time I work with women who will have a copper IUD in their body. They take it out, and the next week, they feel better, and they assume that their body is now balanced. No, it's not. You've simply, taken a weight off your shoulder in the sense of you've eliminated a toxic exposure from your body. Your body's breathing a sigh of relief. And inevitably, a month, 6 months down the road, they're struggling. So this is where the HTMA comes in so importantly, because that helps you understand what's happening with the mineral system. So one of the first things that, we should be looking at is, what are the obvious signs of elimination? Are they completely exhausted? What are their bowel movements? Are you having one bowel movement every second day? If you are, that's a good sign your body is not ready to be dumping large amounts of copper, because it's going to be floating around and it's not going to be leaving your body. So work on, of course, supporting the liver, supporting detox pathways, supporting motility, right? If you have to do a couple of weeks of some kind of a colon cleanse or taking some kind of a laxative or something just to get things flowing and moving, maybe a colon hydrotherapy as well could be employed, depending. There's conditions where you wouldn't want to do that. But that's just a common sense thing to look at. What are your bowel movements? Anybody can ask that question.
I ask it every call, every time I have a consult with someone. So what are the bowel movements like? Yep. And they often, sometimes, especially those new clients, I'm regular. How often qualify? How regular are you? Are you going once a week regularly? Are you going, twice a day? What is regular to that person? Because they might think it's normal to do that. And I've had clients, once they begin the program, like at least the program I put together for them, they're like, "Oh, it's a pain in the butt. I keep going poo. Like I'm going twice a day sometimes now, and it's like it's a real burden." You got to be doing that, like that's a part, like it shouldn't be a pain in the butt to do that. But Rick, do you find that sometimes, you're not trying to cause someone to dump copper, but it still happens anyway? Because I've had that before, when it's used, just give a couple of nutrients just to support metabolism. And then it just seems like they're dumping copper. And even the next test will find even an elevated copper that wasn't there before. And we didn't really try to do that. And then it's kind of like scrounging up, trying to give these things to kind of really improve, bowel movements and all, just to ensure that it's being eliminated. That's what I find, at least, because I don't always try to get it out, and it comes out sometimes.
Well, look, I mean, you can do whatever you do with nutritional guidance and guide in a very gentle way in that sense. But if the client has some major stressor going on, or they decide to run a marathon or intense exercise, that's going to induce a dump. So it's not always what the practitioner is doing in terms of giving supplements. Like, what is the person's stress level? What are they going through? What's the exercise? Because all those factors can induce dumping.
Can I get your opinion on something, Rick? So there's well known in HTMA, there's kind of like a fork in the road where the roads divide. And it seems like as the road divides in different perspectives, it keeps dividing. So it turns into like this fractal, division. Not everyone uses copper as a supplement. I know you work thousands of people with copper, so I know you have a lot of experience in this. Do you recommend clients avoid copper in their food? Do you use copper supplementation for those, people with copper excess or copper burdens? Or do you just try and eliminate it all and antagonize? Like,
No,
your thoughts?
no. So first of all, there is no one size fits all protocol. Everybody is unique, bio-individually unique. So I will never say that this supplement, this food, everyone should take. In my opinion, that's dangerous. And I see that. I see people who are copper toxic. So, for example, a fast metabolizer with low copper level, they might do quite well with beef liver, which is a high copper food. But if for people who are truly copper toxic, they might not be tolerating that beef liver very well. And I've seen people taking beef liver because they've been told to and getting worse. So it's a bio-individual approach. And what I tend to do, we all need copper. Okay. This is also a misconception, is that copper is all bad. It is not. Copper is an essential nutrient.
Yeah.
So there's this delicate balance between, work supporting detox and detoxing copper, as well as supporting the bioavailability of copper. So it should never be all about trying to just detox copper and not support the bioavailability of it, or avoiding all copper foods. Someone who is copper toxic with a very overt, clear copper toxicity condition, no, I do not suggest high copper foods. Does that need to religiously avoid everything 100% that has copper in it? Absolutely not. Be intelligent in your dietary choices. Know what's high copper, know what's not. If you're, maybe avoid the beef liver, maybe avoid the dark chocolate.
Okay. I just have to act because I know like Dr. Eck, one of the pioneers in the field,
Yep.
he's seen high copper, he'd recommend copper. Especially if someone has had high copper or if they've been eliminating copper over a prolonged period of time, he would still suggest it. And his idea was that, well, the body just kind of dumps it all out and that it just tries to get rid of everything. And in doing that, it creates a deficiency state. So he provides some to kind of support that. So, and I know, Dr. Watts he'll use a lot of copper as well. It's, those fast fours or something, you get 10 milligrams, which is a big dose, because they're trying to change the hair test itself. So that's why I asked, is I know that like even the pioneers would have used copper, but that doesn't mean we have to going forward, or at least be mindful on the dose if you do, or, consider food first and all of this stuff. So that's why I ask, Rick. It's not because, it's a charged question. It's literally
it is a charged question. I've seen both. I've seen more so men than women experiment with pretty high dose copper and seem to be okay. I've seen also clients who've been taking copper or beef liver and they feel horrible. And, Dr. Rick Malter, 40 years in the field, working largely with copper toxic clients.
Yeah.
He'll agree beef liver is not the best suited food for someone who is truly copper toxic. I'm somewhere in the middle in terms of, I like to use a product called beef organs, or a blend of organs.
Yeah.
When copper is low in the HTMA, or I should say, copper is commonly low in the HTMA, but in a fast metabolizer, oxidizer pattern, I'm okay with beef liver. But for a slow metabolizer, I feel much more comfortable. It has safer reactions to use a blend of organs, such as, there are beef organs products out there that have a blend. So there's still liver in the product, but it's usually at 1/5 or 1/4 or 1/6 of the amount blended together with other organs. So it has a much more balanced ratio of copper, zinc, and iron.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. I've personally have had issues taking liver supplements, but I'm fine eating liver. And I think that it's probably to do with processing or something as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I've taken copper as a slow oxidizer, as a fast oxidizer, but it might be this masculine thing. It's a little different than the females. I've had clients where I'll try one approach, and it might not work. And then I'll change to a different, methodology, because it just doesn't seem to be going the way that it's been that kind of expected things to turn. So I'm kind of in the middle too, where I'll use it sometimes, but then sometimes it's just that sometimes even that intuition, you just go, no, let's not do that. I guess I got another question then. A lot of people talk about using whole food vitamin C because it's got copper and tyrosine in there, and they say it's the true molecule of vitamin C. Do you use that, or are you open to using just ascorbic acid because that can lower copper?
Right.
Quite.
Yep. No, I agree with the use of whole food vitamin C. And this is another controversial topic, as you said. Not everyone agrees with this.
Yeah.
But because there is a copper molecule in the whole copper ion in the whole food C molecule, it is more supportive for copper. Again, we're considering detoxing as well as supporting bioavailability of copper. If the person has a deficiency of copper, then ascorbic acid can make that worse. Same thing with oxalate issues, right? Ascorbic acid is generally not ideal with oxalate issues, but whole foods tends to be better tolerated. So yes, I do use whole food C when appropriate.
Okay. Yeah. I rarely use it. I recommend people eat it, but I rarely use it.
Sure.
Yeah. Tell them to avoid vitamin C containing foods because they're pretty much stuffed if they try. Almost even meat has, a form of vitamin C, dehydroascorbate. It's not technically ascorbic acid, but they're just not testing for ascorbic acid when they do analysis. So it's still there. It's just in a different form.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would rarely use ascorbic acid except in cases of true copper toxicity. You can use ascorbic acid to help bring down copper. Again, for immune function, yes, we can all do ascorbic acid, short term to boost our immune system. That's fine in my opinion. And when people ask me, can I have, it's my birthday, can I have a drink tonight? Can I take ascorbic acid, whatever it is? What matters is the things that you are doing day in, day out, long term. If you're doing something for short term, a few days, for a week, it's not the end of the world. What matters are the daily habits that you develop.
I think so, because we're looking on a hair test on an average of 3 to 4 months,
right?
Not micromanaging your life every day. So on average is what you're typically doing, not the one-off things, because I just think it's interesting that people kind of overlook that one. It's like you have to be this purist person and everything has to be perfect. And personally, I think you should be able to do some things that aren't called healthy. And I think if you can do that and not reap the wrath of it, that's a sign of health too. I feel like if you have a bit of, refined sugar and that knocks you off your horse, then I don't care how healthy you think you are, you're probably not. I think humans should be able to take a little bit of stuff because, like what happens if you go for a walk beside a road and a car comes by and blows smoke in your face? Is that going to destroy your health completely? I don't think health is that fragile. I think you should be able to adapt to those things and rebound very quickly. So, the occasional drink or whatever, I don't worry about.
Exactly. You got to enjoy life too. You got to find this balance where you're still enjoying life and you have the flexibility to do so. If a protocol is too rigid, any rigid dogma, I think people can often then rebound in the opposite direction because they simply can't handle it. And then they'll kind of rebel and rebound in the opposite direction.
I think so. It's like they say, you tell a child no, he's going to go yes.
Yeah.
Right. So, and not saying everyone that is childlike, but I mean, I'll admit I'll do that. If someone says, don't take copper, I tried it. I took 30 milligrams of copper to see what would happen. Cause I've done it with every nutrient, just took a whole bunch of it just to see what its effects would be. And I felt if I'm going to recommend a client take, 100 milligrams of zinc, I better do it, and see what that's going to feel like, if at least in my own personal experience. So I've tried taking everything, high dose boron, high dose copper. The only one I didn't do is iron because I don't really like iron supplementation anyway. Do you use iron to antagonize copper at all?
It can antagonize copper, but I don't use iron. No, I'm quite opposed to iron supplementation. And just in the past, few weeks, I've had two clients, both of whom have been on high dose iron supplementation. One was, I think, 325 milligrams of ferrous sulfate or 60 grams of elemental iron. And she's a lady in her 20s or 30s. And then another was a 2-year-old toddler whose doctor had put this toddler on, I believe it was 30 milligrams of iron, which is just...
That's a big dose for a little
it is the epitome of negligence, in my opinion, to do that to a 2-year-old kid. And not surprisingly, the majority of his symptoms and this other lady, both their symptoms were quite reflective of zinc deficiency, which is not surprising because we know more than 25 milligrams of iron is going to impair your zinc. Mm-hmm. So this 2-year-old toddler, most toddlers are born zinc deficient to begin with, being put on high dose iron for his age, depleting his zinc, causing a whole range of health issues. And same thing with this young lady. So no, iron, I believe, is being given freely, without looking at what is the underlying cause. If you are diagnosed as anemic, it's the fad word, you're anemic. What is the underlying cause of that? And unless you have ongoing, really heavy bleeding, or you're a vegan, aside from that, there is very little reason for a person to be anemic. It's an issue to do with iron metabolism, and that's got to be supported first.
I agree. And I always say, because I don't like using it. Giving any mineral gives me anxiety, it's iron. And I've had to do it honestly in the past. I just had to because we've tried and exhausted all other means, and it was like, okay, let's try it. And then as soon as the person started taking iron, they started feeling nauseous. They started having a lot of issues with cramping and digestive issues and all of this. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I know what it is. It was the iron, right? And that's one reason why we don't like recommending it. But then, I've had to recommend, like in some cases of pregnancy, near that last trimester, the baby starts taking a lot of the woman's blood. They didn't have good, you kind of get in a rock and a hard place as a practitioner and things like that. So I have used it in the past and recommended it. But even then, sporadic use, you don't have to take 30, 40, 60 milligrams every day. Take it occasionally. It's still going to bump your overall thing. And on average, you'll have a higher iron intake. Right. But yeah, I've had to use it. Just have to be honest.
Yeah. And like anything, whether it's iron, whether it's copper, zinc, magnesium, whatever it is, understand that all these minerals have interactions with other minerals. So if you're taking iron, then maybe it's wise to add in a little extra zinc because they antagonize each other. Yeah. So if you're taking
not at the same time though, hey.
Sorry?
It would maybe not at the same time because it might block it. Who knows? Of
course. Yeah. I mean, the timing of the day matters as well. But during pregnancy, the woman's zinc level is also dropping, right? So if you're taking iron during pregnancy, you've got to be mindful of not making that natural zinc deficiency even worse.
Of course. Yeah.
Because then that zinc deficiency opens the door for copper to increase.
I agree. Flat out agree. I was thinking, because we have a newborn, that like a lot of the creams that they would use for like a rash or something have zinc in it.
Zinc in them, exactly.
It's very small amount. It's only in a little dab you use or whatever. But it was interesting to me because I was thinking like, children on milk, milk is classically quite low in zinc. Maybe nature intended that, we can't always override, assume that they're vitamin D deficient. So give them vitamin D and all of this. But it just got me thinking a little bit about how we use some zinc supplements and even transdermally or something, where as you get older, those things kind of go away as well. It's not like people regularly put zinc moisturizer on them. They'll usually use just whatever they use, which probably doesn't have zinc in it. Right. So what happens, I think, is like this lack of consumption. And I know when I grew up, I went vegetarian because of the ethical reasons. And I was one of those people that thought I could get zinc from food as a vegetarian. So I used to go out of my way and eat ants. So ants were high, they're black foods, they're high in zinc, right? I'll tell you, my first hair, you wouldn't think I was getting any zinc.
I'm sorry, you ate ants as a vegetarian? Did I miss something there?
Yeah, I ate ants. So I wasn't like a vegan. It was like, I'd eat egg, I'd have milk and dairy product, and I would eat ants. So, and cricket was kind of like, I would do it, but they didn't taste that nice. So they were efforts, of like when you go to an extreme, how far more extreme you have to be to get something. And I was a whole foodist. I was like, oh, I don't need the supplement. I can get it from food. I couldn't, so now I, happily will take, at least for me, and this is a little different for every person, but I easily go up to 100 milligrams of zinc. And I don't have any issues at all when I take a dose like that, except, in small doses throughout the day. Whereas I've had clients like my wife, who's not like she's my client. Well, kind of, I mean, I do her programs, but, when I first recommended her zinc, she couldn't do 25 milligrams. Mm-hmm. And so I guess you would find that in your practice too, people that can't take
all the time
a dose
all the time.
Even
guys can generally tolerate a lot more zinc than women. If we're taking 50 milligrams or 100 milligrams, it's usually not a big deal for guys. For women, I rarely would ever recommend more than 25. I would usually start off around 10 or 15 milligrams. And zinc, I call one of the more volatile minerals when it comes to supplementation, just because the reactions are so individual. That's not to say that zinc should be ignored. And I've heard, not even to, worry about zinc. And that's just utter nonsense. Zinc is imperative for so many things, including keeping copper in balance.
Yeah.
But in terms of tolerance, some people and women, some women can tolerate 25 milligrams, no problem at all. And some cannot even tolerate 5 milligrams or even 2.5 milligrams. It's that extreme where you're literally dabbing a wet fingertip into an open capsule and then licking the zinc off your fingertip. And that's all you can tolerate.
Yeah.
It's a very individual and volatile mineral in the sense of tolerability. So start low dose and gradually work your way up.
I agree. And I mean, I'm quick to recommend a high dose, but I say that to every person. Start low and then build your dose. Even with any program I put together, at least if I recommend to take things 3 times a day, I can't micromanage everything on a piece of paper of, start this, that, and then it gets chaotic and confusing. So I usually just say, start with the time slot or 1 or 2 products in a time slot in the morning, start taking something and then see how you go for a bit and build it in. And because the reality is, it doesn't matter how experienced you are, at least in my experience, it doesn't matter how experienced you are. We can't predict how someone's going to respond to a program.
Exactly.
Even if we have seen this exact same pattern on a hair test 100 times, it's so individual.
Very true.
So,
it is.
All right. So I guess I wanted to just bring up a little bit about, some of the work you've done in HTMA. So you've done coppertoxic.com. You've done the HTMA Virtual Summit. So you're really trying to move the field in a new direction.
Not in a new direction, just maintain the integrity of HTMA because I see it being it's being led astray by different forms of HTMA that I do not feel are really supportive of the field of HTMA in general. And that includes the over automation of reports or just relying on, relying on over automation. Different types of HTMA that often don't follow even at the lab, don't follow proper testing protocol. See, some HTMA is more focused on toxic metals. And then we talk about, well, is the lab washing the hair sample or are they not washing the hair sample? And if they're not washing the hair sample, or regardless of what they do, it's not likely to affect the toxic metals. So if that is the focus of the HTMA, then you can work with whatever lab you want to. But if the focus on nutritional hair analysis, which is, relevant in this conversation with minerals like copper and zinc and whatnot, you want a lab that is not ideally washing the hair sample and follows all proper testing protocol. And the ARL lab and the TEI lab are the two that have advanced this field the furthest and follow, all proper testing protocol. And it's very easy to, I think, attack HTMA when tests are misinterpreted, when HTMA is combined with all kinds of, woo-woo angles, and you bring in, all kinds of controversial theories about weird concepts. I'm not even going to mention them here, but I know it's been going on now for several years. And
incorporating religion, I think it messes it, and spirituality.
Yeah, it's religion, sexual preferences, politics, alien stuff, spirituality. I mean, if we want HTMA to be accepted clinically, we need to stick to the science. And that is my focus. And that's the reason why for many years, or for several years, we would get together. This is prior to COVID. Myself, Dr. Karen von Mervold-Guevara, Dr. Rick Malter, Rachel Newman, several of us would get together annually down in Sedona. And we were planning to launch a live event for teaching HTMA to practitioners. And then COVID hit. So we switched direction, and we ended up, myself and Lisa Patel-Killa, we decided to create the virtual summit. Mm-hmm. So now annually we run the HTMA virtual summit. You're one of our speakers, which we're grateful to have you. And it's just about bringing the real science and the real experience back to HTMA, where people can learn about minerals, about HTMA, keeping the integrity of this field intact. I think it's very important. And then, yes, I do HTMA in clinical practice as well. I mentor practitioners in this field. So yes, I'm well versed in this mineral, and I teach the mineral mastery course as well. So the mineral mastery course it's a foundational education for anybody interested in learning about minerals. It's difficult to talk about minerals without HTMA though, right? So I do teach about HTMA, but it's not an HTMA focused course.
Okay.
Right. And that's one of the things that you're adding is your course is quite focused on HTMA. But the mineral mastery course brings a lot of unique insight into the foundational aspects of mineral related health, reasons for imbalance, and whether you're a practitioner or just in the general public wanting to improve your health. That's what mineral mastery is about teaching.
Cool. Yeah. Cause I remember, it must have been like at least 10 years ago. And I know I'm a young guy, but I started off with minerals pretty early. I was fortunate enough to go to a few seminars and learn a thing or two when I was young, because my mother was really into health as well. But it must have been about 10 years ago when I first learned, probably more, when I first learned about vitamins and minerals and the effect that they can have on people's livelihood and quality of life. And every time I tried to bring it up to other practitioners, or anything, I talked to a naturopath. When I was a kid, I'd call up a naturopath's office and just be like, let's talk for a bit. I want to know what you do and what, and because I thought about being one. I thought about doing, chiro. I called them all up and talked to them. But when I called them up and I asked them about vitamins and minerals, they're like, oh yeah, they're important, but our practice doesn't focus. We're really on like hormones and using progesterone and stuff. And it was like, I thought they were just missing something. Like minerals is like critical. Like you're made of minerals. How are you going to overlook what you're made of?
Minerals regulate your hormones.
Exactly. So, I really appreciate you doing work on educating about minerals, and it's not an easy task because, like, where do you start? When people say, "Oh, minerals are essential," We're not saying like, oh, they're critical. They're very important. We're saying like, you can't live without them. They are essential to life, but people kind of just overlook that word. They're like, oh yeah, they're important. Like, no, you got it all wrong. You see, like, you can't live without them.
Yeah.
So
I find that unless somebody is a practitioner with a deep interest in learning, or unless somebody is struggling with a significant health condition and somehow they've been led to connect the dots to the underlying mineral imbalance, most other people, their eyes glaze over if you say minerals are important. Oh yeah, I take a multivitamin.
I've had clients that are like working with other practitioners. It's really common when you work with chronic health conditions, and they go, oh, I'm working with a practitioner on my thyroid. We're taking ashwagandha. And I'm like, great. Ashwagandha can be really helpful for adrenal, really helpful for thyroid. What are you doing nutritionally to support this? Oh, I'm taking mold binders and I'm taking this. And it's like, but are you
your iodine, your selenium, your manganese, your zinc? They all play a role.
Exactly. And I'm like, geez, like, they have to be there. Like, they don't come from nowhere. I don't care how advanced meditator you are. You can't conjure up minerals. I know that there's breatharians that say they can, but I don't think so.
Yeah, well, I've worked in my client base. I've worked with everyone from the sickest of the sick to champion athletes, nutritionists, dietitians, people who have all the tools in their toolkit, functional diagnostic nutritionists. They all have supposedly the tools in their toolkit to eat and live healthy. And yet a lot of them have symptoms. Even the elite, my elite clients have symptoms, and they all have mineral imbalances. So to think that just by eating healthy and doing everything right, you're going to have a balanced mineral system is wishful thinking.
I think so. Absolutely.
I really feel that the mineral aspect to health and nutrition is one of I would say it's the most overlooked and yet important aspect to health and nutrition.
I think so. Yeah. I think minerals are more important than vitamins because you need minerals for vitamins to work.
Exactly.
So even sometimes, people are like, get concerned. Oh, how do you discern about a thiamine deficiency? And I'm like, well, I want to make sure that their adrenal function's working in general, not just thiamine, not just vitamin B2, not just vitamin B5. I'm like, so in my practice, and I'll speak for myself, Rick, because I don't know entirely about what you do. But I like to recommend nutrients in general and then do a kind of mineral balancing approach. So I don't want a client of mine to be deficient in vitamin C. I don't want a client to be low in B1, B2, any of them. I make sure you're getting at least the RDA. And then I'll do the other stuff, because especially if you're working with people with chronic health issues, and if their minerals are in balance, they're likely deficient in multiple vitamins as well. So I don't care if they're 4 lows and 4 low pattern. People often say don't give B vitamins. They're too stimulating. Sometimes a little bit is needed, I think, at least, and I will provide them. And sometimes, especially with that 4 low case, and I mention this just because I know that there's different camps that are approaching it, but people often use sedative nutrients, calcium, magnesium, zinc. I find that there's 2 different situations there where some are depleted and they honestly just need to like put the adrenals to bed, like Dr. X says, and put them to sleep. Not like a vet, but like, make them tired. And then there's the other group that are just so depleted. They don't have the nutrients to actually have energy anymore. So sometimes I'll give, a 4 low pattern, a little bit of B vitamins and then slow them down. And for others, and this comes from a conversation. This doesn't come from a mathematical equation on a hair test. This pattern equals this dose. It's, hey, we need to give some more B vitamins regardless of the hair test, and, support your body's ability to recover, so I'm kind of like in the middle. So, I think minerals are so important that I'll recommend them, even if it's somewhat contraindicated sometimes on the hair test. All right. Do you have any like shout outs before we end this conversation? I think it was fantastic.
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone listening, whether you're a practitioner or just general public, to dive deeper into this mineral world and HTMA. Learn as much as you can. I want to say, take John's course, take my course. John, yours is coming out when? Early next year?
We're hoping next in 2023. Our course is done. It's just, there's a little bit of errors on slides, and in the beginning I had microphone issues and camera issue, and so like the content's done. It's just redoing it all over again with one fine-tooth comb to make sure that everything is good, because I feel, to be honest, at least with my course, is that I felt like there was a need for a more in-depth on hair testing, and not just hair testing. We go into, the principles and philosophy of natural medicine, which is, I think, your principles and your philosophy guide your whole practice. So to me, it has to be a part of your perspective when you learn HTMA, because if you come from it thinking replacement therapy is the best, or if you come from it thinking reductionism, bring it down to the single things is the best, that's going to affect your practice down the road. And so we wanted to kind of at least educate you, our students, on what, at least the natural perspectives are. It's up to you if you're going to believe them. We're not like dogmatic, but it's at least bring them to the table and talk about holism and this kind of stuff. And then we did a separate course on like nutrition, and we just covered the foundations of nutrition. What does berry look like, and do we see it in clinical practice? We might not find the diagnosis, but we still find people deficient in B vitamins. If you have a client like dermatitis and diarrhea, and their memory's going, I would be considering vitamin B3, regardless of the hair test. Let's kind of support that. And we talk about the limitations of symptoms and the limitations of the test as well. And we still encourage people to keep going after our course, which is 100 and something hours. I think it was 150 hours of recorded information, to keep going and learning, because life is about learning. You can't just stop and just be like, all right, I'm an expert. I'm still learning. I'm forever reading textbooks on vitamins and minerals, PubMed articles, reading Rick's stuff, your articles, watching your stuff, watching other practitioners in the field to see what they are coming up with. So I really, keep learning, as you said, Rick. It's just this is the way of life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the Mineral Mastery course, which I teach at mineralmastery.com, this, as I said, is a course for both practitioners as well as the general public. Going deep into the minerals, reasons why we have mineral imbalance, things like zinc deficiency, which is so often overlooked, and the myriad reasons why zinc is important and why we have imbalances with zinc, and same with magnesium and copper, especially. I mean, I am the copper guy, so this course is the fundamental course for learning about copper toxicity. Anybody dealing with copper toxicity, this course can be life-changing. And honestly, John, like when I've had two mothers now. Well, one mother with the morgue situation, where her daughter was told there's no such thing as copper toxicity, was on a copper IUD, killed herself, and then the mother went to the morgue to collect the hair sample, and the hair sample showed sky-high copper. Now, if the denial of copper toxicity didn't exist and people were educated in this information, we could literally be saving lives. So I'm very passionate about getting this information out there and helping support young women, especially, with this vital health knowledge.
You're doing a great job, especially with your website, coppertoxic.com. I go to it. I send clients to it, especially as soon as I get a test and it comes back with high copper, immediately go check out that website,
Well, thank you, sir. I could probably add some updates to it. It's several years old now, but the
this is just the way. Yeah, it's always that way. You learn, and then it takes a little while for it to reach the websites. It's also another reason why it's great to work with you or work with a practitioner, because they don't always have time to update their website.
That's the thing, right? It's just time. I don't have the time right now to be tweaking the website, but course goes through it in a very easy to understand way, because the Copper Talk site is, there's a lot of information there that, can be overwhelming. So I teach things in a step-by-step progression, easy to understand, connection between minerals and vitamins, connection between minerals and toxic metals, and how understanding the mineral imbalance helps you understand toxic metals, how to detox those toxic metals, all of that. So one thing that, in terms of shout outs, John, I will simply mention this for your listeners. I've created a special deal for your listeners of the podcast. It's an extremely original promo code, podcast30, and you'll save 30% on the Mineral Mastery course. So at mineralmastery.com, at checkout, promo code podcast30 to save 30%.
Cool. Thanks. That's awesome. I did not know that was coming. So that's awesome for you. And, we're going to put that links and all that in on our webpage so that you or anyone else can find it. And that's fantastic. Thanks for that, Rick.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, I'm going to call it a day, and thanks for joining us. Hopefully we can have another chat sometime in the future. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me, John.